There's an old saying among Miamians that everything that happens in the world has a Miami connection. Well, in the 1980s, Miami was the connection, and it all centered around a hotel in Coconut Grove called the Mutiny Hotel. And out of that came a book written by Roben Farzad called Hotel Scarface. Could you just paint the picture of what it was like here in the 80s and what the Mutiny Hotel really was all about?
Take it back to the late 70s and early 80s. The skyline had one skyscraper on it, maybe the AmeriFirst building. South Beach was desolate. It was like a big old age home. There was no Art Deco revival yet. There was one boutique hotel and club in Coconut Grove that attracted the cosmopolitan set. Celebs, rock stars, drug money, obviously, Venezuelan oil money, Arab sheikhs, kind of like our Studio 54.
Now, what went on at the hotel? You know, why did everybody go to this hotel rather than another hotel?
This was a really unique hotel, 130 theme rooms, fantasy rooms, like the Bordello suite, the Cappuccino suite, the Fourth Dimension room. Every room had mirrors on the ceiling. And the club was where you would go to see and be seen. So if you stayed at the hotel, if you're someone out of town, you would want to stay in the place that the moneyed people would be seen. And then obviously the likes of Brian De Palma and Oliver Stone would follow suit, Al Pacino, the Miami Vice people came in. So in the absence of everything else, without anything really going on in South Beach until, let's say, 1987, 1988, this is where Miami partied.
When did it all fall apart?
As soon as Miami became the murder capital of America, let's say by 1981, and on the cover of Time magazine is Paradise Lost, and people in the club realized that it wasn't all just easy blow, easy sex, that an actual waitress was murdered in savage style by a serial killer, by a cocaine cowboy murderer. The cops were on the scene. Ronald Reagan takes the oath of office, and he realizes it's morning in America and deputizes Vice President George H.W. Bush to run his South Florida Drug Task Force, and they effectively told the owner that your time is limited here. You need to sell this thing. It's exceeded its value as an ecosystem with which to place informants and watch how people transact here. It's become a hub of murder and violence. You need to get out of Dodge. You need to sell. And he did at the end of 1983, and it quickly glide pathed into bankruptcy, and that was the end of the hotel.
Well, that also, there was a shopping mall there called the Shops at Mayfair,
right,
which was built with drug money and was for customers that had that kind of money, discretionary money, to spend. Mm-hmm. And that also disappeared just about the same time.
The system was overrun with cocaine cash and money laundered. And you know, by the time the mutiny fell apart, you had a couple of really smart waitresses and hostesses go up a couple blocks. One built a club in the Mayfair called Ends and Bitters, and that's where the doper scene moved on. Another one was called Cats. Another one was called Suzanne's by the general manager of the Grove. And the dopers and everybody else in the 80s moved on to these clubs. And the mutiny became a victim, amazingly, of the savings and loan crisis. So you had a place where I like to argue that the Cold War crashed into the cocaine wars, crashed into the Iran-Contra scandal and the SNL crisis, all at this corner of South Bayshore Drive. I mean, that's the kooky theory that I ran with.
Well, there were two names that were in the news when I first came here, Willie Falcone and Sal Magluta.
And they're still in the news. So this is a story whose inception is in 1980. The original guilty plea for cocaine trafficking that he did in the state court under State Attorney Janet Reno was in 1980. He's on the lam for much of the 80s. He fights the jury, does all, the adventures of Willie and Sal in the 1990s, and it still hasn't ended almost 40 years later. One other point about Willie and Sal, as the Miami intermediaries of the Colombian cartels, they were really kind of paradoxical. It wasn't life or death for them. One of the dopers who worked with them said a fate worse than death was to be blacklisted by them, to be kept out of their party and out of the canonization and the lionization of everything these guys had going on at the Mutiny, at the Cats, at Ends and Bitters, was a fate worse than death. And nobody would think that Pablo Escobar and the Cali cartel's best friends in Miami were, we want to be loved, not feared.
That's interesting, because there was just in the news, there was every day somebody else was murdered, and the cops just threw up it looked like they threw up their hands and said,
They did by
nothing we can do.
1981, and it's also why they were very bribable. It's why we had the Miami River cops. It's why so many things went wrong in the Willie and Sal pursuit, that documents went missing and people were sprung from jail. It was truly a rotten, rotten system. We were on the border of being a failed state, I'd say, by 1981. But now you look at the skyline. I mean, we're here downtown in Miami, and it resembles nothing like, I like to say go on YouTube and look up Que Pasa USA and look at the pre-roll video for that, and this skyline looks nothing like what you see today.
Well, the one thing that's consistent about Miami is it changes every 6 months or so. So if you're not happy with the situation now, take a deep breath. 6 months from now, you're going to have an opportunity to join the other side or make it different.
It's a city that's constantly reverting between, first class, internationally renowned opulence and kind of a third world.
That's very true. But somewhere in the middle is most of us. Well, let's get back to the book. It's called Hotel Scarface. And it's all about the scene down here when Miami was the drug capital of the world. And is it going to be made into a movie?
I hope so. We have a production deal with Stone Village Productions to seek, I think, not movie per se, because I don't know if we could fit this into 90 minutes, but a premium cable or Netflix type series. That's my dream. We couldn't fit every story into this 320-page book.
Well, when you write the script, you think you can stick in a small man with a handlebar mustache into it?
You know what? Go out there and Google image Rodolfo Rodriguez Gallo. Rodolfo Rodriguez Gallo, and look at the mugshot. He looks exactly like this man. He's a main character in the book named Rudy Redbeard. He's what he looks like today.
Well, in addition to writing this book, you also have a radio show on NPR. What's the show about?
I like to entertain people by teaching them a thing or two about business or economics or entrepreneurship. Really, we can have anyone on the show, from a comedian, a hedge fund manager, an expert on meddling in the Middle East. It's just open-ended, and I think it's actually beautiful that quote-unquote radio has been broken up into these trillion pieces of people with microphones, and you can just access it on the internet. It's kind of a dream come true for me, especially because I think I'm never going to write anything ever again after this book. This was an ordeal, but I had to do it. I had to do it because I felt a trauma when I was a youngster who came from Iran to Miami, and my city felt a trauma at the same time. And for both of us, there's a lot that was unresolved over 35 years. That's the honest truth.
Well, that might be your next book, and resolve all of those issues, because your issues are very similar to my issues and Dina's issues, and we're all dealing with them. But somehow it's always interesting to see how somebody else can take a similar or a parallel issue and deal with it and maybe help us find the answer to our issues.
Yeah, I mean, I only flicked at what was going on with me in my life, but everybody kept asking, why you? You were only 4 or 5 when much of this stuff happened. But once I realized I was onto something, I couldn't get it out of my mind, couldn't get it out of my system, and it just kept gnawing at me. Do it. Pick it up again. Pick it up again. There's something more there. I can't tell you how many hours I spent at this Flagler Street library flipping through microfilm and old stacks of papers and connecting dots and informant records. And, at some points I thought I was deranged, like the character in A Beautiful Mind. I was connecting dots that didn't exist. But it happened. At some point, you're given a book deal. You're told you have to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And the beauty of it is in the editing, is in the distillation of it. It's easy to say in hindsight. It's not easy. It's a very solitary thing that you have to do, but I feel like I'm greater for it.
Well, that's a very good lesson for all those people out there that want to be authors. It's just not sitting down and writing a rough copy and then handing it to somebody and you're done. It really is hard work, and you did a tremendous job.
Thank you.
The book is called Hotel Scarface.
In closing, it's my love letter to my hometown.
Well, it's beautiful. So thank you very much.